Okay, welcome artists. Welcome to Art Adventures Live. I'm Mr. Andy, the Studio Programs Manager here at Joslyn Art Museum, which means I get to make art with people like you that come and visit the museum. Today, we're coming to you from our Masterson studio because we have virtual camps happening right this very instant next door in our Cooper studio. Normally, Art Adventures happens every Friday. It's a free drop-in experience for museum. It's free for museum members. And it happens every Friday morning at the museum throughout the year with our friend Miss Therese, who might be watching from home today, who is, and Miss Therese is watching. She can answer any questions you might have as we go along in the comments below. In this time of COVID, we're all doing what we can to help keep each other safe. So I'll be bringing Art Adventures to you each week so you can make art in the comfort of your home. For a full list of all upcoming Art Adventures, we just released a new list of June adventures, including in June supply bags are available for these June adventures. For a complete list of our June art adventures with weekly material list, please visit joslyn.org. If you don't have materials ready today, that is okay. You can watch me today, follow along, and then we'll come back to joslyn.org to find a recording and make art when you have time. Each week, we'll be inspired by a different artist or artworks from Joslyn's galleries and collection and create our own masterpiece while learning how these works of art were made and what makes them so special. This week we're going to be, we are inspired by a work of art that you can actually come and see right now. This giant yellow sculpture by George Sugarman is in Joslyn's Discovery Garden. And it's a perfect spot for a picnic lunch. And it's free to visit even when the museum's closed, like it is now. Sculptures are three-dimensional artworks. This means you can view them from all sides. 3D artworks have 3 dimensions. They're not flat like a painting or a photograph or drawing. These artworks take up physical space. So we can walk all the way around a sculpture. This is a geometric sculpture made by my friend Bart. We can walk all around a 3-dimensional sculpture. We can stand under them or sometimes even walk all the way through them. Like this geometric form. This is a 2-dimensional shape. So a 2-dimensional shape is flat. Our 3-dimensional forms have 3 dimensions. We can walk all around these 3-dimensional sculptures. George Sugarman was born before World War II. And he did not begin to make art until the 1950s when he was almost 40 years old. His early sculptures were made of wood and clay. And he was inspired by the way abstract artists before him used shapes to make pictures that did not look like real life, but broke up people and objects into little pieces and showed us things that only existed showed us some things that only existed within an artist's mind. Like this picture from Joslyn's galleries. This painting by an artist named Stuart Davis. Take a look at this other painting by Stuart Davis from another museum. And look at that, compare that painting to this sculpture, this wooden sculpture by George Sugarman. I can see similar shapes and colors. In this 3-dimensional sculpture, these shapes and colorful forms are stacked and assembled together. George carved wooden shapes and assembled them like a carpenter makes furniture or a construction worker assembles a building. He would carefully stack and assemble his carved wooden forms in interesting ways that were carefully balanced, sometimes appearing to float or as if they might fall down. Other times his sculptures were sturdy and strong. Sculptural balance is the equal distribution of weight. That means that equal distribution of weight, that balance, keeps the sculpture standing up so it doesn't fall over within its 3-dimensional space that it occupies. I usually have pretty good balance. I have good balance now when I'm standing here. If you're a gymnast, you know all about balance as you walk on a balance beam. If you're kind of clumsy, sometimes you might be unbalanced and fall over. Let's talk about symmetrical sculptures. If a sculpture, some sculptures have symmetrical balance, like this Joslyn sculpture called Pond by Sidney Buchanan out near our parking lot. If we cut this sculpture in half, like chop it right down the middle on its vertical axis, the weight and mass is nearly the same on both sides. The left side matches the right side. The shapes and forms are repeated in a mirror image, making this work appear to stand very still and strong and heavy. Sumo wrestlers are very balanced. They spread out their legs so they don't get knocked over. Many of George Sugarman's sculptures are asymmetrical. This type of balance is uneven. If I chop this one in half, the left side looks different than the right side. Asymmetrical sculptures often balance big shapes with small shapes. Just the right shape and just the right spot can hold the whole thing up. If we take away one shape, the whole thing might fall down. Oops. Asymmetrical balance can create an illusion of movement and allow a sculpture to appear light and airy. Sometimes they look like the forms and shapes are crawling all over each other. Other sculptures might appear to be standing up on their tiptoes or floating away in a breeze. George Sugarman is inspired by balance and the formal structures of his sculpture. He's not interested in making a work of sculpture as something we recognize like a tree, a person, or a duckbill platypus. He wants to make sculptures that are just sculptures. He's inspired by the forms he creates, the color he uses, and the physical space of assembling these colorful forms so they stand up. He's inspired by the physical science of assembling the colorful forms so they stand up as a work of sculpture in space. George's sculptures are almost always perfect or purely abstract or non-objective. This means he's not interested in making an artwork that looks like something we recognize in real life. His sculptures are pure expressions from the artist's imagination using shape, line, color, form, and space. This does not mean we can't look at a work of sculpture by George Sugarman and have imaginative ideas of our own. Often this can be the most exciting part of looking at an abstract artwork. Each of us can look at a sculpture by George Sugarman and imagine something different within our own mind. We might recall memories from a long time ago. We might look at a work of sculpture by George Sugarman and think of a special place. It might inspire a new idea that never ever entered your mind. After many years of making small sculptures of wood made from wood and clay, and George Sugarman learned all he could about balance, shape, movement, and form. So now it was time to work big. Sculptures made from wood or clay are only strong enough to reach a certain size. And George wanted to make sculptures that were huge, sculptures that we could walk around, like this big sculpture that it's almost as big as this building behind it, and we can walk all the way around it. Sculptures where people could hang out, they could meet, have lunch, get to know each other around this sculpture in a plaza. Sculptures that changed the entire space. Sculptures that made people look up at the sky or called to people across a grassy lawn where you could see a sculpture from the distance and that sculpture would say, "Hey, come here." In the 1960s, lots and lots of skyscrapers were being built. These regular size sculptures would seem very tiny next to these huge, huge buildings, like this huge skyscraper in the background of this sculpture. Huge towers like this required huge sculptures to fill their courtyards and entries. And George saw an opportunity to begin making giant public sculptures made from metal, just like Joslyn's Yellow Ascending. The title of this sculpture here at Joslyn is called Yellow Ascending. Yellow Ascending is made from assembled metal or aluminum shapes. So this is made out of aluminum, just like your soda can. These aluminum shapes are carefully assembled with bolts and welded joints. Bolts and welded joints, just like the way that a bridge is made. You can see in this picture. This person using bolts to put together this bridge. The aluminum shapes in our sculpture, a yellow ascending, some of those shapes are attached with nuts and bolts, just like a bridge. Here we can see some of those nuts and bolts. Bolts and nuts that hold our shapes together. Some of those shapes are held together with welded joints. Here we see a welder. Welding, which means we're using melted metal, very hot melted metal, to hold our aluminum shapes together, kind of like metal glue, melted metal glue. Here's a close-up, a picture I took of our sculpture out in the sculpture garden, where I can see nuts and bolts that hold together the shapes that lay on top of each other. Where those shapes lay on top of each other, they're attached with nuts and bolts. And where those shapes meet perpendicularly, where they come up like this, there's a weld. When you get close, the next time you're here at the museum, you can get up close and look to see how each of these shapes are attached. How are they held together? Each piece holds up another piece. If we take one piece away, the whole thing might fall down. This sculpture is even bolted right to the ground. This sculpture does not sit up on a pedestal. When you're in Joslyn Sculptures Garden, you might walk around and find sculptures that are on a pedestal. George Sugarman likes to put his sculptures right on the ground, so you can walk right in there. You can sit down right there and have your lunch. George Sugarman's sculptures are often huge and made of several tons of metal. They're super heavy, but they can appear light and full of movement thanks to the asymmetrical balance and the irregular pattern of all the shapes and forms that are assembled. The positive, we can also find many positive shapes and negative shapes. The positive spaces are the shapes that take up actual physical space. All those shapes we can go up to and touch. And it's okay to touch this sculpture. You can get up, and all these yellow shapes are the positive shapes and forms and spaces in this work of sculpture. The negative spaces are all those areas that we can see through, or you can even crawl through. This sculpture is big enough you can walk right under and through those negative spaces. Yellow ascending is made up of all sorts of big and small, positive and negative spaces and shapes. Some of these positive metal shapes, these positive yellow shapes, bend and curve to create a sense of motion as they reach upward towards the sky at a diagonal. You see the diagonal as it goes from this corner to that corner. The negative shapes can be found all around our positive shapes and in between our positive shapes, those open spaces where we can see blue sky, like this close-up picture. I think I took this one when I was laying on the ground looking straight up from inside the sculpture. I can see blue sky. Look at that interesting shape. I see a triangle, a blue triangle here in the negative space between our positive space. In this triangle, this negative triangle, I can even see the tree from behind it. When I walk around this sculpture, all of these shapes will change. And then the colors and the textures within these negative shapes change because you'll see different things behind the sculpture. Before George Sugarman's assistants built these giant sculptures in the foundry, he often created small maquettes. I don't know if this is a black and white picture, but over here, here's old George looking out the window. Back here in the background and right here is a maquette. That's a small, tiny sculpture, a model made from cardboard. George would make these models out of cardboard and practice with different shapes and forms, and he would assemble them to create different positive space and negative space. He'd build them out of cardboard so he could practice the balance, so that he could make sure that sculpture would not tip over, and find interesting ways to create symmetrical or asymmetrical balance. All while he's making these tiny sculptures, he's always imagining, he's thinking in his mind, what would this thing look like if it was 100 times as big? What would this thing look like from colorful metal. What would this thing look like if I was a tiny person walking underneath it and around it? We're going to make a small sculpture maquette of our own by assembling shapes to create an abstract, non-objective sculptures with interesting balance, maybe symmetrical balance, maybe asymmetrical balance. And as we make our tiny sculptures, you're going to imagine that it's a huge sculpture. Imagine there's a tiny person walking in and around it. We're going to do this together. We'll go step by step using our materials from our material list. So before we begin, let's take a look at our materials to make sure we have what we need. We'll take a look here at our materials. So today is our first June art adventure, which means we have a brand new art adventure bag for June. June's art adventures bag is brown. It's been busy around here, so we don't have an image up. We don't have a logo on this bag. But these bags are available for you to pick up every Thursday. You can come to the museum, and right in front of our atrium entrance, you'll find a bin full of material bags for those that need them for free. And that will be out there all day long on Thursdays before our Friday art adventure. So let's take a look at what we have in what we need from our new art adventure bag. Well, let's take a look at this. Here's all of our art adventures. That's important in Spanish and English, so we know what's coming up. Then we have a roll of paper and foam sheets. We won't need all of this roll, your roll, but we'll find two big colorful foam sheets like this. Like this. One of these colorful foam sheets has a white back. Has a colorful front and a white back. That's a sticker sheet. We don't need this sticker sheet today. So put that to the side and keep it for a future art adventure. We want the foam sheet. The foam sheet's kind of squishy, different than paper. That's colorful on both sides. Now your foam sheet, if you picked up a bag from the museum, might be curly like this. If your foam sheet is curly like that, when it was rolled in a tube, flip it over. Let's just roll it up the other way. Before we begin, you can roll that foam sheet the opposite direction, and we'll see if that flattens out a bit. Kind of make your hand into an iron and iron your foam sheet. Don't burn yourself. Put it like this, like that, nice and flat. Now, if you picked up a material bag, our watercolor paper and the sheets that we'll use for future adventures are probably rolled too. You can do the same thing. Roll them the opposite direction or put them under a heavy book so they're nice and flat when we're ready to use them in our future adventures. But now our foam sheets, nice and flat, we're going to use that to make our colorful shapes that we'll assemble to create our sculptural form. We also need from our bag, should be a white piece of cardstock, also kind of curled up, just like our foam sheet. Take that piece of cardstock. Cardstock is like thick, heavy paper. If you don't have cardstock, perfect thing to use. Go to your recycling bin, pull out a cereal box, pull out a cracker box, maybe some junk mail. Some of that junk mail. It's nice. It's thick and heavy. It might be junk, but it's perfect for art. Flat. Now my cardstock is flat. My foam sheet is flat. What else do we need? We'll need some scissors to cut our foam sheet, to cut out the shapes. We'll need, you might, not in your bag, but hopefully maybe around your studio space at home, you can find a pencil. We're going to use that to help assemble our shapes. You might use your pencil to draw our shapes. If you don't have a pencil, there's a black crayon that you can use in your supply bag to help us draw our shapes. And then down at the bottom of your bag, carefully, you got to find, will be 3 brass brads. These are these shiny, they almost kind of look like nails, and on the end I can open them up, just like that. You see, that's a brass brad. And we're going to use that kind of like our nuts and bolts, just like the nuts and bolts on Yellow Ascending. These will help hold our shapes to the ground, and I'll show you how when we're ready. So I have 3. In your bag, you might have 2 or 4. or 3. We just need a couple brads. If you have more, if you're at home, if you have lots of brads, you can use lots of brads. But I'll show you another way to help for us to assemble our shapes as well. So, let me give you an idea. I meant to show this to you earlier. So we're going to use these materials to make our own tiny maquette. Just like George Sugarman will make a tiny maquette, a small tiny model sculpture from cardboard or other materials before creating these gigantic sculptures from heavy metal. We're going to make a tiny maquette from using our foam, our colorful foam. We're going to design shapes. You might choose to use geometric shapes or organic shapes. We're going to cut those shapes out, and I'll show you some special techniques to assemble our shapes to create a sculptural form with positive and negative space. Parts of that sculpture that we can see through, and parts of those sculptures shapes that are positive. You dig? All right. So let's begin. Let's start. We need to think about how this sculpture is going to stand up, and we're going to use our cardstock as if it's the ground. So many of George Sugarman's sculptures, and he was famous for taking his sculptures off a pedestal and putting them right on the ground. So those sculptures were a part of our space. We could interact with them. We could walk right up to them. If you come to a museum, sculpture's on a pedestal, that's a pretty clear sign that that's a sculpture you don't want to touch. It's up high. It's in a special space. It's a space of all its own. These sculptures, our sculpture, is going to share our space. And we want to imagine people walking all over the ground. So you see what I just did? Forgot to tell you what I did. Take your cardstock, fold it in half like a birthday card. You dig? So hold it in front of you horizontally like this. Fold it in half. And I made a crease. We're going to do that just to make our cardstock even thicker, to make it sturdier. So if you have cardboard, or if you're using a cereal box, you can maybe skip this step. But that's going to help hold our sculpture up. We have to think about, this is like our foundation. We need to think about when sculptors, people who make sculptures, they kind of have to think like architects and engineers. We have to think about the sculptural integrity. How is this thing going to stand up? And so we need a strong foundation, just like a house or a building needs a strong foundation so that house or building does not fall over. So this is the ground. We're going to make it strong by flipping it over like that. Next. Actually, what we're going to do next, we'll put that to the side. What we're going to do next is we're going to start to think about our shapes. And we're going to take that foam, that colorful foam sheet, and we're going to cut out lots of different shapes. George Sugarman in his foundry, in his workshop, has lots of shapes around him, almost like Legos or building blocks, module shapes that he can choose from and pick out this shape and assemble it, stand back, look at it, and move it around. We're going to create a plethora, lots of different shapes for us to look at and choose and assemble, just like putting together Legos to create some balance that is interesting. To create balance that is interesting, create positive and negative shapes that might create pattern or things that we think are interesting. So I have several. Grab your colorful sheet of foam. I think I might actually use white because I like to use white. Can help us see the shadows that are created. The other interesting thing about sculptures is that it casts shadows, and as the sun moves across the day, yellow ascending changes throughout the day. So we have one big sheet of colorful foam, but we want to have lots of shapes, and we're going to create big shapes. We're going to create 2 big shapes. This is some black fun foam that I cut up earlier. We're going to create 2 medium shapes. We're going to create 2 smaller shapes, and we're going to create 4 itty bitty shapes. So we'll be able to use and assemble and take apart and assemble again and try several different combinations of all of these shapes. And you'll choose to design geometric shapes, organic shapes, or maybe a bit of both. So we're going to first cut it into all these different rectangles. Big rectangles, medium rectangles, and teeny tiny rectangles. And then we'll alter those rectangles. So first, what we're going to do, I have my big sheet. If you want to, you can fold it in half, or you can eyeball this. I'm just going to eyeball it, freestyle it. But let's put it in front of you horizontally, like a landscape, right? Horizontally. And we're going to cut right down the middle, or just about the middle. And it does not need to be a perfect straight cut because these are not going to be rectangles for long. So now I have two big sheets. You dig? Now we're going to take that one, let's put one big sheet to the side, one big rectangle to the side. Take our second rectangle, let's do the same thing. Chop it in half again. Doesn't have to be perfect, cut it. So now we have two big shapes, just like that. Right? We're going to put those to the side. Those are going to be our big shapes in the sculpture, right? Yes. Yep, that's right. Okay, now we're going to take that big rectangle, the second half, take that, chop her in half. But we want this big rectangle, one of those two big rectangles, to become two medium rectangles. So put it outside, chop it in half. So now I have two medium rectangles. We'll use those for our medium shapes. Put those right on top of your two big shapes. Take the other half of that rectangle, chop it in half again. But now we want two smaller shapes. So take one of those two rectangles, chop it in half. So now I have two smaller rectangles. So now we have two big white rectangles. Yours might be green or yellow or orange. I have two medium rectangles, two smaller rectangles, but we're still missing those. Thank you, Miss Jennifer. Rectangles can jump off your table sometimes, but so now we're still missing our teeny tiny rectangles, right? So we got to take this last rectangle, chop it in half, and then chop that in half again. So now we have two tiny rectangles. Do the same thing. We want to have four tiny shapes. Four tiny shapes. So we have all kinds of options, and we can think about how these are going to be assembled. All right, now it's time to think about what kind of shapes you want to use. Some of you might remember our organic shapes. Those are math shapes. This sculpture by my friend Bart is geometric shapes. Did I say organic? Geometric shapes are math shapes. This sculpture by my friend Bart is a geometric sculpture. It's made up of different math shapes. I can see all these triangles. Math shapes are triangles, squares, circles, rhombuses, dodecahedrons. These shapes we often see geometric shapes in buildings, in architecture, and things made by people, and they all often appear kind of rigid and strong. You might choose to use lots of math shapes or geometric shapes in your sculpture today, or you might choose to use lots of organic shapes. Often, George Sugarman will use lots and lots of organic shapes. These are irregular shapes. Shapes that often don't have a name, like circle, square, rectangle. They might look like a splat, might look like a bug that hits your windshield. These are shapes you can find in nature. These organic shapes can help our sculpture appear as if it's growing out of the ground, or like pages of a book blowing in the wind, leaves rustling on a tree. You can decide, but we're going to create abstract shapes. We don't need our shapes to look like anything other than the thing that what you're imagining in your mind's eye. Now you can, and I'll show you how right now. You might just freestyle. You don't need to draw your shape onto your piece of colorful form. You can use your scissors like a drawing tool, and we can freestyle our shape and just cut away. Imagine that shape in your mind. Maybe even close your eyes so you can see it right here in your imagination. And then I can cut to alter that rectangle. I could cut just like this and around. If I use curvy, wandering and meandering lines like this as I cut my shape, it will produce a organic shape, right? Organic, like something from nature. This shape, I could not easily give this, I could create a name for this shape, but I can't look it up in my math book and find a name for this shape. That's a good organic shape. These scraps might be cool to hang on to, so you may make a pile of scraps, but we won't need that right now. If you'd rather draw your shape, use a pencil or a black crayon. Pencil will make a thin line, so we won't notice it as much. But I'll show you with the black crayon so you can see. Simple to draw on here. I might draw an organic shape. And then we'll make a geometric shape later on. Let's do another organic shape. These two big shapes, these are going to be on the bottom of your sculpture. They're big. They're going to be strong. They're going to be able to hold up all the other shapes. So we want these to be big. So I challenge you to, if you're drawing a shape or cutting a shape, try to touch all four sides. You did? We're going to come all the way over here. Maybe my line touches that side and even just kind of kisses the edge right there. Get really close and come back around like that, just like that. So now I've touched all four sides with my line, right? Now, if you use your black crayon or a pencil to cut, that's A-okay. That way you can check it out and like, maybe I like that shape, but maybe I'll ignore that line and change it a little bit, right? Artists can sketch and practice and change our ideas. When you go to cut, carefully cut. You guys remember how our scissors like to chomp on paper? Cut all the way in the back of your scissors and cut away from you. And then try to cut on the inside of that line. That way, we want our shapes just to be pure color. George Sugarman loves color, loves shapes. But most of his shapes don't have lines or stripes or things like that. So I'm going to cut on the inside carefully. I can cut on the inside. See what I'm doing? Cutting on the inside of that line. And if I can even change my mind. Maybe I don't like, maybe I don't like that line. Maybe I'll come in here and freestyle a bit over here and make a bumpy line. I'm going to stay on the inside of that black crayon line. So when I cut it off, when I remove that shape, there's no black crayon around the edge. If there's black crayon around the edge, no problem. That's okay, A-okay. But because I cut on the inside, all that black crayon is there on my scrap. And I could use that later on. I could even, if I wanted to later on, I can add my own pattern. Maybe you want to incorporate ideas. George Sugarman doesn't use pattern, but you can. So, two big shapes. Let's keep on cooking. All right, let's go to our medium shapes. We'll work from the biggest to the smallest, right? Let's try a geometric shape. I'll freestyle a geometric shape. Now remember, geometric shapes are math shapes, or geometric shapes, and they might be math shapes you recognize, like an octagon or a rhombus. But they might just be shapes that are made up with straight sides. Geometric shapes can be a shape that you create of your own, a polygon, with straight sides and angles. So I could freestyle some geometric shapes like this. This time, instead of making a meandering kind of curvy line, I'm going to make some sharp, jagged angles. And this might be at a different, might create some different movement, different rhythm, different feel. Just like that. Kind of give them that shape a haircut. Now I have all these little triangles. Those might be fun to use later too. So I might even make a pile of those little triangles. All these little scraps can be good for other things, perhaps. So keep them by. We'll put them in our scrap pile. So that's a pretty big shape again. Just like before, each time we make our new shape, we're going to touch all sides. So this time I'll draw one. Let's do another geometric shape. This one might be like, might bounce around the edge, like the screensaver on your DVD. Hit that one and bounce over here, kind of like Pong, bounce, bounce, bounce. Hit all sides, just like that. And what do we do if we want to remove those lines? Cut on the inside, right? Just like we did before. So I'm going to take my scissors and try to cut right on the inside edge of that line, just like this. Just like this, just like this. Notice when I'm cutting, I like to always cut straight ahead of me, right? That way, instead of moving my scissors this way and that way, I can just rotate my piece of paper, my fun foam, and cut from a different angle. Look at all these great triangles. Isosceles triangles, other triangles, right triangle. All right. Two medium shapes, two big shapes. Now we have all these other shapes. I'm going to keep cutting, and you guys just keep cutting too. You got the hang of it, right? I'm going to cut kind of quickly, And every time I cut, I'm thinking I want to try to challenge myself to touch all four sides. Sometimes I might just cut away just a little bit. All right, that's an interesting shape just like itself. I might just cut away a corner like that just to make that geometric rectangle. If I cut away the corners, it's going to be more round and organic. Look at that, jelly bean. Just like that. All right. Keep on cutting. Keep on keeping on. Cut these shapes into interesting shapes of your own. If we all made rectangle sculptures, it would not be much, and you wouldn't be able to express your own style. So you want to get stylish. Imagine shapes in your mind. No one has a mind like yours. And then take those shapes out of your mind. Cut them out of that rectangle. I've seen a million rectangles, but I've never seen that shape that's in your head until you show it to me. So cut it out, cut it out, cut it out, cut it out. These itty bitty crumb shapes, they might not be useful for us today, but you could use them in a collage sometimes. So again, try not to keep a tidy workspace. I'm not always very good at that, but I'm going to try today. I'm going to try today. And we can use those, hang on to those maybe for other things. I bet you've been making lots of art in this time of COVID. Now it's summertime. Maybe you can even make art outside. All right. So if you are still cutting, that's A-okay, but hit the brakes for a moment, please. Hit the brakes. Put your scissors down and put your eyeballs up on your screen, and let me show you what we're going to do next. Because we're almost ready to assemble our shapes. Right now, these are pretty two-dimensional, but we want to be able to twist and turn and assemble our shapes together to make them three-dimensional. So how are we going to do that? All right. One way we're going to do that, we're going to use our brads, which I'll show you in just a minute. Those brads are jumpy. But the other way that we're going to do this, we're going to create some slits. Let me show you what I mean. We're going to create some slits. So remember we made two big shapes? In my example here, I have two big shapes that we've used our brads to attach to the ground, which I'll show you in just a minute. But before we do that, we're going to create some slits. Some of you might have toys like this at home that kind of lock together using these slits. One shape can lock into another. We're going to create several slits on the different sides of our shapes. So we have several different options for how this sculpture might be assembled. Because you might want to build it once, stand back, look at it, and decide to build it again or change one shape with another shape. So we're going to create lots of slits so these can interlock in different ways. And the way we're going to do this, watch me first. We're going to do this. We're going to make instead of cutting in the back of our scissors, this time we're just going to make little slits. You dig? And you're going to look around, and let me draw on this one so you can see what I mean. I might look at all my sides. And if it's a big shape, I might be able to put several different slits. It's big enough to accommodate. It has lots of different area for these slits to be made. So I could maybe a slit is just a little tiny line that we're going to cut with our scissors. I can put one on this side, maybe right in here on this little concave area, a little valley. See that valley down here? That might be a good place for a slit. Maybe up here on this convex curve, at the tip of that little hill, maybe another slit. Maybe I can put 3 slits over that hill. There's a lot of room there, right there. Maybe one more slit here. You dig? So we're going to take that, and then take your scissors and take a little bite, a little snip, a little nibble, right on those there lines that we made. Now you don't have to make lines. After you practice it once, you probably got the hang of it, right? So I can take that. We want to try to make our slits. Let me show you. I'll make a couple more lines. When I make my slits on this piece, I want my slits to be about the same size. See how that line is about the same length as of my previous slits. That way when we interlock these shapes, and I'll show you in just a minute, they'll lock together nice and tight. So going around, snip, 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 all on each side. So my big shapes are done, keep on cooking, go to your next shapes. And my geometric shapes, I only have 2 of those. My medium shapes were my geometric shapes. So I need to look at that and decide where might be an interesting place. Maybe right there. Maybe, and then we can add more slits later on too. When we start to assemble, you might decide, hey, I need a slit right here. Okay. So I'm just going to put 3, and I might think about adding some later on. 1 here, 1 there, maybe just 2 on that one. That might be, and maybe 1 here, 1 here, 1 here. Just keep on keeping on and cut out those shapes, or cut out those slits here and there and everywhere. Right? These are just going to give us lots of options. George Sugarman said, one of the things he said about sculpture is that it's complex. Now, the complex, not in the way that this is hard to understand, because it's just shapes and color assembled, but complex, kind of like science is complex. George Sugarman loves science, in that there's lots of different avenues you could pursue. There's lots of different components, lots of different things that hold the world together. And that's just like sculpture, all these different things that hold the sculpture together. All right, so now I have slits all over the place. Those are good. I'm going to keep my piles. That way, what do they call this? There's a term. Maybe in the comments, if any of you people are Lego people, there's a term for putting all my Legos in just the right spot so you can pull it out. You might make piles of all your shapes so you can pull out the one that you need. But now we're going to get ready to assemble these. So grab your cardstock. This is our foundation, right? You can imagine this being the floor. It might be a parking lot. Not always the most interesting place for a sculpture. Ours is in a beautiful amphitheater. So in our picture here, right here where I took this picture, I'm standing on a stone step, and it's hidden behind a little hill. So going on this side of the sculpture, perfect for a place for a lunch. So you can imagine where your sculpture might be. When I took this picture, the museum was behind me. I'm looking out towards Creighton. So you can imagine where your sculpture might be, and this you can even draw on here and show us where your sculpture is. But we're gonna poke a couple holes in here, and that's for our brad to come through. Now I'm gonna start with 2, or actually no. Let's see. Let's do 4. I'm just gonna put it randomly. Now we've done some hole poking before. If you have a hole punch, you could do that as well. When you're poking your holes, what I like to do is spread my fingers out in the back, or ask an adult or an older sibling. But spread my fingers out, and I'm going to try to poke my pencil right through those fingers. Instead of right through my finger, I'm going to go right through the space between my fingers. So I'm going to watch this. On this side, you can see you'll watch my pencil pop through, just like that. All right? You might need some muscle, because we want this to be a strong foundation. So if you're having trouble, no problem, go ask somebody that can give you a hand. I'm just putting holes randomly, just like we kind of cut our slits randomly. And I'm going to start with 3, but you could keep adding more and more, and this just gives us more options. We can decide it gives you opportunities to experiment, just like George Sugarman building his cardboard maquettes with our different shapes. Now grab our largest shapes. Now this foam is not as tough as our cardstock, so we can just kind of grab a brad, and we can poke our brad right through it. See how that goes right through it? Like a magician with a sword in the box thing, right? We're going to go right through there. And then we're going to take that, push it through. You decide where you want your shape to attach. Push it through your foam. And if you change your mind, you can change your mind and try another way. Take your brad, slide it through the foam, and then take the end of that foam. Keep the prongs together so it's straight. And then when it pops through, take that brad, spread the legs of that brad out like that. Let's probably have a name. And that's going to hold that together just like the bolts. Remember when you come and visit Joslyn next, down here at the bottom, there's bolts that hold it to the ground and bolts that hold it together. So those are going to be the bolts that hold it to the ground. I'm going to grab my second large shape, do the same thing, poke it through, decide where that might go through, and then I'm going to pick one of these holes, maybe this one. Now I have 3 brads. I can decide maybe I need, if I put 3 brads at the bottom here, it might give my sculpture more sculptural integrity. It might help hold up my other shapes. Or you could save your brad and use it as we go along. You might find a need for a brad later on. And the sculpture, that when you come and visit, the sculpture Yellow Ascending, all those shapes that lay on top of each other like this, when one shape lays on top of another shape, there are bolts, nuts and bolts put in there. That's kind of how we'll use our brad. You know, that brad is far apart from that brad, which means this is laying pretty flat. Maybe I want this sculpture to stand up on its tiptoes, like some of those other sculptures. I think, you know what, I'm changing my mind right now. I'm going to poke another hole. If you decide I need another hole, I want a hole that's closer together so this sculpture can stand up tall and proud, almost like they're standing up on their tiptoes. Their fists in the air, just like this. All right. Got it? Cool. All right, so now we just get to experiment by using, we're going to use our different slits. And if I take one slit and slide it, this shape's going to meet this shape perpendicularly, like that, like a T, perpendicular. They're going to crisscross, and it takes a little, you might have to stick your tongue out, give it a try here and there. All right, maybe hold that there. And we're going to try to build, we're going to kind of build onto each of these shapes and we'll see how they can, different ways that we can make these shapes connect. And as we do this, I can bend and twist. And if it doesn't quite reach, I can, I'm checking it out here. I'm like, oh, I need to try it this way. Kind of like little Pac-Mans biting each other. All right, keep on keeping on it. I might need to make another. I need more of a bridge, an archway, because these shapes are farther apart. I need another connecting piece, maybe a tiny piece. Create some irregular balance of these shapes. Twist it over, boom, like that. Look at that archway. Now I can imagine I'm a little tiny person down here walking through here. This might be a nice place for a lunch, or someone can put on a violin recital in there, right? And now we're already getting pretty big. We have this interesting loop, this archway here. I can think, and then now's a good time to stand back and look. I say, oh, I have this geometric shape with this jagged edge. Where might this shape go? And maybe I can twist it and see how that shape changes if I twist it around. And you find the perfect spot. Put it on there, check it out. If it isn't the perfect spot, pull it off, try it again. George Sugarman tries, experiments until he gets it just the way you want it. Look at that. I like this. Now I'm going to, maybe I need a third little piece over here. Create sort of a pattern, some rhythm. You can jump from this one to that one to that one. Still have some other pieces. Maybe you don't need all your pieces. That's okay too. So I've been using this white, all these different white pieces. And look at how on this white sculpture you can see all the different shadows. You see all these positive and negative spaces. All these shadows are interesting. Where this shape in here casts a shadow on the shape below it. And if there was, when you come to Joslyn, if you come in the middle of the morning, the sun will be over here. And the shadows will be different. When it gets up top, the shadows are down. The shadows are coming from this way. You could experiment. This is some, if you want to get a Art Adventures gold star, extra gold star in your art toolbox. Grab yourself a flashlight or a lamp. Turn off the lights and look to see how the shadows change. You can even grab your sketchbook and draw those shadows. Draw your sculpture. When it's tiny like this, I can turn it all the way around. Look at your sculpture from all sides. See if that sculpture has interest on each side. See if there's something that makes you excited to walk around it. And when you walk around it, I can even, when I look at it from above, imagine if I'm a bird. I have this kind of S curve here. That's kind of interesting. All these different, and I can imagine if you're a little tiny person hanging out in here. So, keep on trying. Now, well, the great thing about this, you just created yourself a toy you can use, or a toy, or an art idea tools with these modular shapes, right? Just like George Sugarman, that you can build, take apart, and build again and again all summer long. Maybe take a photo each time with the device each time you do it, and share some of those photos with us by posting them to our Facebook, the event page for today's Art Adventures. Thanks for making art with me today. Please do share those photos with me, and check back every week at the same time. Next week we won't be live because I'll be teaching a camp. You can find out all about our camps by visiting Joslyn's website. New camps for July will be posted very soon.
Virtual camps.
Virtual camps. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, of course, COVID, right? Virtual camps. And we're having a lot of fun with virtual camps right now. We'll have new camps, virtual camps posted for you in July. I'll see you again next week. Thanks for making art with me. Adios.